We have officially started, and we will give it a second for folks to trickle in here. But I'm super excited. It's been great to get to know you over the past couple of years here, Jeff. So thank you for coming on and sharing all of your RevOps wisdom here with everybody.
My pleasure. Yeah, it's been great getting to know you guys too. I look forward to chatting through maybe a different or non-traditional side of RevOps. I think it's an interesting angle to bring in to your audience and also to just talk about as more of a well-rounded view on RevOps in general.
No, likewise. We get a lot of questions, and for better or for worse, a lot of our customers are actually outside of the SaaS space, and so this should be a really fun conversation. So why don't we go ahead and dive in? So just as a quick refresher for everybody that has joined, we've got a Q&A section at the bottom here. Feel free to submit any questions that you might have down there, and we will try to get to those throughout. We've got a lot to cover. We've got 30 minutes here. We'll share the recording. So Jeff, let's go ahead and dive in. Maybe where we can start, it'd be amazing if you could just share your background briefly on your path into RevOps, and we'll kind of dive a little bit deeper from there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I've been lucky in my career to work with a lot of great mentors and learn from them and work in different avenues and industries, mostly outside of SaaS, but recently in SaaS. So I feel like I'm well positioned to talk about this particular topic as it is near and dear to me for sure. I'm a revenue operations leader. I've been in the field for, almost 20 years now, doing sometimes undefined RevOps work, but then certainly by title as well. I've worked in most aspects of the manufacturing model, whether it be a distributor model, a manufacturer rep model, a direct B2B and B2C sales model, marketplace model, and then most recently in a hardware platform, which is also Manutech related. So, I've had the pleasure of growing RevOps teams from the start, often first hire or early hire, really seeing the transformation of that RevOps function, not only in those businesses, but obviously, more broader in the community. And then specific to me, I've seen, growth within, the 20, call it mid 8 figures and well into the mid 9 figures with, PE exits, IPO, and some other things that I think are probably relevant, but certainly I've been especially proud of teams I've built through the years, and obviously the systems and the legacy that has been left behind that I think companies are still benefiting from today. So super happy to be here and share what I can about RevOps in a non-SaaS function.
I mean, when most people think about RevOps, they do think about RevOps in SaaS. I'd say at this point, RevOps is pretty ubiquitous across software. Not every company has it yet, but I'd say the value is definitely there. When you think about manufacturing or other, kind of more physical industries, what does this RevOps really look like there, and how does it compare to maybe traditional RevOps, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think RevOps is a SaaS function. I think it was born there. It certainly took its form there. But I think RevOps in general is a revenue system design discipline. In SaaS specifically, I know, subscription models force that kind of rigor that RevOps are famous for producing, creating, architecting. CRMs were always central to the business. Data was natively digital, which is one of the big gaps, which I'm sure we'll get to. And the closing cycle was relatively linear. Outside of SaaS, revenue is often episodic or project based, especially. The systems are incredibly fragmented, and in various forms and fashions for sure. There's a physical operations matter or issue, and margin is operational. It's not just contractual. So there's another layer of financial wisdom in there. So I think that when we talk about there's a lot of talk about RevOps and the future of it, especially with AI, and that's something we can easily touch on. But I think really the next great frontier for revenue operations, especially as it relates to non-SaaS function, is really margin intelligence. I got to thinking the other day about what to talk about here, and it became kind of clear to me that there weren't a lot of things out there that look at margin intelligence. And that is part and parcel because it's probably not the most sexy or expensive software suite to get you there. But I think that's one of those areas where, especially in a non-SaaS space, that RevOps is going to go through another maturity point. And I think it really is around that margin intelligence theme.
For the folks that aren't maybe quite as familiar, what is margin intelligence?
That's a great question. So, margin intelligence, I think, is, it's a discipline of understanding not just what revenue is coming in, but how efficiently and sustainably that revenue is converting to profits. Revenue ultimately is a lagging indicator of effort. Margin is a leading indicator of sustainability because that's actually what fuels the business. So you can scale bookings fast. I've seen it. I've lived through it at several companies. But the difficult part is, you can't scale profitability accidentally. It's not. It is not a magic wand for sure. And so there's a lot of facets of that you have to consider that go well beyond sort of your traditional stack and measurements of SaaS. And look, and by no means am I suggesting that it's more complex or one is better than the other. That's not it at all. And I don't think we're here to draw a line in the sand, but I think margin intelligence tells you what's worth closing. And that's a little bit different, I think, than like pipeline management, because pipeline management tells you what might close. But sometimes, especially in manufacturing and then also when we're looking at various forms of physical goods, sometimes it matters who you're selling to and how you're selling it. And we went through this quite a bit at Xometry in terms of understanding where to lean in and where to back off spend. Do we automate inbound in some form or fashion to remove burden on low conversion, lowly profitable, low margin. All these conversations come up in a non-SaaS company. I think Xometry might consider themselves closer to SaaS than this conversation will preclude. But having been in there for 6 years, I can give you my opinion on that for sure. But or find other creative solutions that didn't impact conversion in a material way. So not all revenue is created equal, and especially in that space, I think RevOps has to know the difference.
No, it's really interesting. One of the reasons I was so excited to chat is one of the things I'm seeing is what I would call the convergence between SaaS and non-SaaS. 5 years ago, I'm not sure if anyone in SaaS even needed to think about margins. If you're in a pure SaaS business, historically gross margins 80+%. Effectively you can round and call it 100%, right? Like there's effectively no cost to serve software. You build it once, you sell it 1 million times, and like that was kind of it. AI has definitely changed the margin profile. And now I think what some SaaS businesses are starting to see is actually having to be more mindful about this margin intelligence, because it's now possible that your margins are no longer 80%. They could be 40%. They could be lower than that. And so I think really starting to bring in some of like what you were having historically done in the manufacturing side, I think is starting to become even more relevant for folks that are in SaaS. So I think there's a lot of learnings that can be had by that, thinking about the actual margin profile of the business in a way that you could kind of just like glaze over historically. And were the best teams thinking about margins? Absolutely. But if you weren't, I'm not sure if it was critical to the business. Today, absolutely it's critical to the business. I want to touch on one of the things you mentioned. You mentioned siloed data, which is something that we hear even in SaaS and non-SaaS. What are like the key differences from like a systems perspective, maybe that you see on like the manufacturing side versus like what you kind of see more in like the traditional RevOps stack? Are there big differences? Are they? Yeah.
Well, in principle, I think there's more acronym systems. When you think of manufacturing, there's And I mean, in SaaS too, there are ERPs, but I think in the sense of like MRP versions of of ERP, so like the manufacturing side of that, um, that tends to be a lot of very legacy systems. I think of oh gosh, what's the name of that? Oh, it's not coming to mind, but Epicor is a great example of that. Epicor has been around forever and they are a dinosaur, but everybody uses them in manufacturing because it works. And there's nothing wrong with that. And they've gotten a lot better. I haven't been in an Epicor system in a while, so I'm sure they've come a long way. So I don't want to like, knock them. That's not the point here. But they have been around a while, and I would consider them one of those legacy systems. I don't think Salesforce is at a point in its life cycle where people can call it a legacy system. I mean, maybe some people do, but I look at the horizon and think of when it came out, and ERPs or Epicor's been around much longer than that. But other things could be claim systems in healthcare, policy systems in insurance. I think distributor portals, channel partner type portals. Bob, just Bob sitting at the desk next to you, right? I know that sounds silly, but if you think of manufacturing as a tail end economic factor, then you have a lot of companies that have been around for a significant amount of time. Some of them want to grow, some of them are happy with what they're doing, and in a large way, like, they're okay with Bob sitting over here owning this one thing, and it's in Bob's head and on his PC, and if his PC crashes, like, the business is going to be out for a few months while they figure out how to recreate what the heck's going on. That is very true. Bobs of the world exist. Bob systems of the world exist. And so I think when you're walking into a situation like this, when you're talking about like fragmented data, creating a single source of truth is a feat. Sometimes very, very difficult. But I think when you talk about really understanding that margin, and you take revenue intelligence another layer deeper, right? So when you step into a situation where you're coming into we'll just say non-SaaS or manufacturing, however we want to frame this up. I think your initial time period there is closer to forensic accounting than anything else, where you're really trying to find every control measure, every cost center, every profit center, and connect them together so that you can get a really true picture of, okay, when we put $1 in, what's coming out? And that, so you're putting $1 into marketing spend, it's trickling into sales, and then it goes into an operating cost, and then out the other end is your margin, right? And there's obviously a lot more intricacies than that, but I'm just to sum it up, and a lot of the stuff that's operationally driven is those legacy systems, and getting those all into a place where you can understand, like, this is where we should focus because it has the highest, you could use all the SaaS terms in here as well, as the quickest cycle time, has the highest, average, order value or average sale price or ACR in some situations. But I think in general, there's the whole other side of that too, which is like, okay, well, this makes barely any money. It's got a long sales cycle. Or this thing over here, which is more transactional, and we can really crank up the scale on this. Like, where would you focus? Right? Yeah, we want to close these, 20K opportunities over here with regularity, or 50K opportunities, or whatever sort of your, top 5%, ASP, or whatever acronym we want to use there. But, conversely, we could, with minimal effort, increase the efficiency of selling this, and it's actually going to way outpace that, and it's a higher profit margin as well when it comes down to it. So that's what I say when I mean, like, not all revenue is equal, and that's really it. It's managed by by logistics, quoting accuracy, commissions, cost to serve. I mean, there's all these different things, which again, some of these are all incorporated into SaaS, but I think it is even more articulated um, in manufacturing specifically as well, because you have this, I think obsession with pipeline and SaaS, where it's, ACV math, CRM forecasting, things like this. But, when you flip the script and look the other direction, there's a lot of data reconciliation, system inventory, looking at where revenue is leaking, margin mapping, which we just covered. And those are all, forensic accounting factors that I think give you the full picture of what's actually happening.
Maybe a good segue from there. One of the challenges I think a lot of folks have in RevOps is being the first hire in, even in a SaaS business, even where folks are familiar, at least generally, with what RevOps are. They may not have the exact same definition as everyone else. It's funny, we ask everyone that comes onto the podcast, what is RevOps? And we've got a different answer, I think about 50 different times at this point. But, by and large, folks generally are starting to understand and starting to circle around at least like where, where RevOps is. Yeah. What you were describing, I'm not sure if Bob knows what RevOps is. How do you think about explaining what RevOps is and the value of RevOps in these environments as maybe the first hire to an organization that just might not even be familiar with, like, what is it that Jeff does here?
Yeah, 100%. I've lived that movie multiple times. It is sometimes like trudging in the mud. And it can be threatening.
Yep.
My gut always tells me it goes back to really, understanding how partnerships with those people make their lives easier. And again, in a non-threatening way, certainly in a partnership way. Sometimes that can be very difficult to break through.
Sure.
Though I think your value is often in connecting all the dots and pulling it all together so the organization can, quite frankly, see what they should be doing, see what they should be focusing on. And in a large way, and I've had, one of my mentors told me this in manufacturing once, which is, the best manufacturers will have an empty warehouse and happy customers. Which is, you think about that and you go, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. But if you break it down, an empty warehouse and happy customers, if you have happy customers, it implies they have your product. So it's like, well, wait a second. Well, what about empty warehouse? Well, it's because we don't have anything sitting on the shelves waiting to be sold. So that is a direct, like, cycle related conversation. That is, you don't want a whole bunch of things sitting on the shelf, right? And so one of your jobs in revenue operations is to really, like, drive forecasting against, like, inventory as well. In a physical good situation like that, where you're the direct seller from a manufacturing site, that is a major aspect of forecasting that is not something even remotely present in SaaS, because SaaS doesn't ship things. It's not confined by a warehouse. It's not confined by a rack, right? And so, their confinements could be service related. We're trying to implement, 30 customers next month, and we have the resources to do 26 of them. How are we going to cover the spread? So that's a conversation, certainly from an implementation. But if your choke point is a warehouse or a lack of inventory or something along, or a QA or QC issue that stopped shipping because they detected something in the field and had to pull things back and rework, that's a problem. That doesn't necessarily happen in SaaS the same way, right? Breaks typically can be fixed relatively quickly and then pushed, right? A push here is it has to get on a truck and go somewhere, or a person has to go somewhere and fix it on site. So definitely differences. And again, I'm not trying to say one is easier, more complex, or better than the other. It's just different, I think as we look at the best ways there, it's very much, I think, a trust factor. I mean, you got to build that trust at an executive level. I think that trust comes from especially, and if you're walking into a position, it's very likely that you've already had some of these trust conversations. Like, so what would you do here
Totally.
if you were, what would you do first? And you lay that out, like based on all my observations, here are the three big things that I would tackle. And I know I don't know everything, but based on what I know, this makes a lot of sense. And I think the how you walk into that then is very much out of a pure place of curiosity. And you have to have that curiosity. And I think you have to have those early partnerships no matter what. And especially with, older companies too. I think it's very much, driving those relationships and helping them see the continuity of what you're doing and how it all ties together. And it's like, you, Bob, sit here doing this. If I could make you, more efficient in this one way of what you're responsible for, that's going to trickle up through the revenue funnel this way. It's also going to trickle down to you in a fulfillment standpoint. And I'm sort of talking about like a post sales,
Right.
logistics or something like that. So again, and again, like it's I don't think it's any different in SaaS. It's just who and where, and the topics of conversation I think are different.
It's just different. Yeah, I worked in kind of a physical business before starting Accountim, and you're right. I think that, in terms of complexity, maybe a little bit more, I would say, from like the physical perspective, but a lot of the things you're mentioning, I think apply across all of RevOps. Being curious, being empathetic to the folks that are like Bob, that are experiencing these challenges, really highlighting how you could be helpful to them, I think goes a really long way, especially for
Yes.
folks that have been doing, the job for 30 plus years, and you're walking in telling them how to maybe they could do it better. It's kind of an interesting spot to be in. I think just bringing like empathy to these conversations is one of the ways you can break through. I want to go back when we were prepping for the call. You mentioned you have a lot of hot takes on the world of RevOps. Give us a hot take, Jeff, and what should we be thinking about here, as we kind of round things out here?
Um, hmm. We've cranked through some of them for sure. Let's see. I'm trying to think. I think the margin intelligence is one of the big cut factors that differentiates SaaS from non-SaaS. And I think that is a major sanity check for anybody that wants to get into a non-SaaS role. Um, when we look at the complexity factor as well, the multiple systems of truth, and while in SaaS, I feel like you don't have your proliferation is more on the engagement side. I think when you walk into a situation outside of that, I think it's very much like fundamental system variation. Um, and that I think is is often harder data to tie together, and also in a non-traditional way. Those companies don't have the same, or those systems don't always have the same sort of prolific, uh, not only development backing, but also like variety. And I mentioned Epicor earlier. I'm sure there are a lot of other ERPs that people can rattle off. Obviously within SAP and so on. But the when you talk to RevOps, you're going to hear the engagement platforms, the enablement platforms. You're going to hear the CRM variants. You're going to hear the AI tools, and it's like, well, nobody talks about the finance tools and how they plug in, or the ERPs and MRPs. Nobody talks about the logistics and shipping and so on. So I think, again, just to sort of circle back on that, I think from a cultural standpoint, um, SaaS within SaaS, I think RevOps is very much born to serve sales and the functions around sales. Um, Non-SaaS, it's more of an enterprise level conversation. And that's where that, I think, trust factor comes in, because I don't think you can operate within sales and be successful in RevOps outside of SaaS. I don't know how you would be successful, because again, you're going to be completely focused on top line if that's the case. Which, if your instinct is to improve speed, that's probably where you should focus. But if you want to improve clarity, in that sort of non-SaaS vein, I don't know how you do that without being in the weeds of other systems that are uncomfortable in that sense. So, when you talk about, you walk in and your instinct is to, again, like build that speed, and you're going directly to operating systems within the CRM, and looking at efficiency metrics across rep production. Those are good things to know and have. How they connect to the margin, again, is, I think, of vital importance to also consider in how you're doing that. So I think if you were in a position to look at a transition from one of these, I don't mean in a very binary way, but we've kind of framed it that way, meaning like SaaS and non-SaaS. I would say it's 80% the same, if not more. But I think it's also interesting if you're in one side of this invisible fence or the other, and you want to go to the other. I definitely think within that there's some repurposing of thought, and positioning of skills that you have in one side and how they apply to the other. And I think that is actually an interesting topic as well. I think we could probably talk for 30 minutes on just that.
I think we could go for hours and hours. But with that said, Jeff, I think we're coming up on time here. Want to thank you so much for this. For me, near and dear to my heart, I love the physical side of business. Like I said, before I started accounting, I was much more in the world of kind of manufacturing and warehousing. All sorts of these types of problems are present. And fortunately, I think there is a lot of that can be translated from that environment to the SaaS and vice versa. So really appreciate you taking the time out, Jeff. If folks want to connect with you kind of after, where's the best place to find you? LinkedIn, probably the best place?
Yeah.
They have any questions on all things manufacturing and RevOps?
Yeah, please. Absolutely. Follow up on, I'm sure you're going to post the webinar. So, feel free to drop a question there, drop a comment there, or just reach out to me directly. In either case, happy to engage at any level.
Amazing. Well, Jeff, can't thank you enough. And everyone, like he mentioned, we're going to share the recording here with y'all. Take care and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.